to why it's doing.
So it's not that, because this is now just ARIA controls practice liability with dashes.
I seriously think it's like do you have a JS function on click?
No, it's fucking open. I didn't specify which one's open. Yeah, it is. It's my state. I'm using the same state for all of them. Of course, there's fucking opening. Oh, dumb.
You want to fix the laptop so it's
in line with you.
So it's in line. Hi, and welcome back to Monetize Me. My name is Mac.
My name is Jay.
Today, we will be talking about a framework for splitting equity. So traditionally, equity splits are done in a fixed manner, where in the beginning, you decide this is how much this founder should get, this is how much the other founder should get, and it's usually based on parameters like what experience you have, what relationships can you bring to the company, how much are you contributing money-wise. And that can cause a lot of problems later on where somebody can feel like they had an unfair equity split or they contributed more than their equity split was originally, than the equity split that was originally given to them. So this is an alternative. It also has its own problems, but it's more of a dynamic way of splitting equity. And the framework is called slicing the pie. I'm sure.
Is it what it's called outside of his methodology, or is it?
So he's the one that came up with it. So it's based.
Oh, he came up with I don't think he came up with the concept of dynamic equity. I think he has his take on it.
Yeah. So this is just a methodology.
But the methodology is dynamically allocated equity, not necessarily slicing the pie. That is the only way to do it.
Yeah. So he basically, his name is Mike Moyer, and he was I believe he was a asset or like I should double check what he was. Anyway, he was in the business industry for a long time, and then he became a professor. And he came up with this slicing the pie model, which a lot of companies have used. It's still not very well known in the industry, but a lot of companies have used, and there have been good stories and some bad stories, but just like with anything, that's what happens, right? So the whole idea of the framework is to basically split the equity based on every founder's contributions over time until you are valuated by an investor. So,
or until money comes in the table, because it's not just investor. It's as soon as we incorporate, or as soon as we have money flowing to where it needs to be defined, right?
Yeah. So the framework specifically says valuation by investor. Maybe he also means incorporation or whatever else. But essentially, until you're established, you keep this alternative equity split system, right? And the idea is you have two types of contributions that a founder can make. You have cash contributions, which is real life money, and you have non-cash contributions, which could be time, resources, facilities, a network, ideas. It's a multitude of things. And for every dollar of cash that the founder invests, you give them 4 slices or points.
Okay.
Right? For every dollar of non-cash, you give them 2 slices.
Dollar of non-cash meaning what my time is worth?
Yeah. So every dollar non-cash, you give them 2 slices.
Okay.
So the methodology deals with non-cash transactions, the value of non-cash transactions, in a way where they say that what is the fair market value for this person's time, experience, expertise, and that's how we're going to determine what your non-cash value is. So let's say in a month you worked 140 hours.
Okay.
You would go and say, okay, for a developer, a software engineer, because you're a software engineer, for a developer, software engineer in the industry, what is the average market value? Or I guess the market value.
The market value based on where you're at, which is around 37 an hour, I believe, right now.
Exactly. And then you take that 140 and you time it by the 37 an hour. And now you have the non-cash value that you in cash, the non-cash value in cash that you provided, that you've contributed, right? And then you time that by 2, and that's how many slices you get this month
from what you've worked. Okay.
So from what you've worked, and then so the cash value is really easy to discern. I mean, if you give $1,000, that's $1,000, right? So that's 4,000 slices.
points. Yep.
Yeah. And eventually, when you do reach that point of termination, when you reach that point of
Or not termination, but
valuation or incorporation, when you have to set down the actual percentages, the idea is now I can take the slices I personally have and divide them by the total slices,
and that's your equity.
and that's my equity.
Okay.
Right? And that's how much I deserve to get from this company. And the reason this is done like this is because when you first start a company, you're taking a lot of risk. And that risk that you're taking, not the risk, but the contributions that you're making are compensated with equity instead of money.
But also, because you're not getting money, you're taking that risk.
Exactly.
And the reason the point system exists before that's established is because it wants to reward contributions with risk as opposed to just regular contributions, but you're also getting paid, or you don't have a risk because it's already established.
Exactly. And the framework basically encourages you to spend equity like you would spend money. That's the whole idea of the framework, is give out slices like you would be giving out $100,000 salary, right? Look at the founder and look at his contributions and say, is it worth this much, right? And that's where the whole fair market value comes in, where you say, okay, based on your experience, you're just right out of college, you can't be expected to be paid $40 an hour or $50 an hour. I'm going to pay you $25 because that's the fair market rate.
That's market rate, yeah.
Yeah, you're spending that shares like you would be spending money, is the idea.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it's supposed to objectively split the equity. I have my contentions about that, but we can get into that.
And like any methodology, it has its pros and cons. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. I think it can be used great in certain circumstances, or you could just go solo found. And then you get all the points, and then you don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah, so some pointers or some tips for using this equity. You have to research the market value of every role that you've established for every founder. You keep a timesheet. Basically, you're keeping score of how much each person is worth every single day or every single week, however you keep it, and monitor the tasks that were completed, right? And then you use milestones and sprints to issue like shares, or I guess slices
Points.
in this case.
Slices.
Yeah.
So one question I have about this, because again, you've looked into this a lot more than I have. How do you get around, or maybe you can't, do you have to be logging hours then for every single employee? Because that seems like some corporate kind of thing where it's like, oh, okay, I worked this many hours, just now I need to log it. Or is it more based on what you finished? But what you finished could have taken a variable amount of time, if that makes sense.
So I think for this framework, you do need to log hours.
Okay.
Logging hours is important because that's what gives you the market value, right? If you finished something at the end of the month and I don't know how many hours you spent on this, how am I going to determine what your non-cash
But then
value is?
that goes back to the ultimate issue of you have two engineers that have both been in the industry the same amount of time, but one has gotten better than the other and can finish it quicker. He's getting penalized because he's faster.
But the other engineer should be getting paid more because his market rate value is higher than the other one.
No. They're the same. They've been in the industry the same amount of time. Say they've both been there for 10 years. But over those 10 years, one has gotten a lot better at engineering. So he works quicker.
Yeah.
Because he's more efficient. He knows how to do it.
So in order to make this completely nuanced and fair, you would have to add in factors like that. You'd have to add in factors of experience, how fast somebody is, how proficient they are.
Do you do that at the beginning to their market rate, or do you give them additional points based on contribution weight? Like pointing a story, you get the story done, you get those points as well on top of your market rate. Then he gets these points, but he got fewer points because he works slower.
So as far as I understand, the framework basically looks at other things other than time. It looks at ideas, it looks at skill set, it looks at facilities and resources and relationships, right? So you have to figure out a way of rewarding that. I don't know if there's a market rate value for ideas. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, which gets away from this methodology being completely objective like it was trying to do. You can't actually be completely objective because
yes.
there are certain things that have to be subjective. Yeah,
exactly. My take on it. So I've actually tried to implement this. Oh,
I heard.
Before we get into that, the framework does encourage choosing a leader to dull out these slices. Choosing a leader to kind of arbitrate and keep track of all the slices, and every month or quarter, however the team wants to do it, basically say this is how much this person got, this is how much this other person got, etc.
Okay.
All right. So just wanted to get that out of
So
the way.
it's just a non-biased leader that's assigning these points.
Yeah, not non-biased. I don't know how non-biased you can get when you actually issue slices to yourself, but as far as it goes, a non-biased leader that manages this basically system.
Which the more objective the points are based on, the easier that job is to keep track of. It's just when you're making subjective calls and just one person's in charge, you can run into issues.
That's when you can run into issues. Exactly. Yeah. I tried to implement this with a startup that I'm working with right now, and we had a whole different approach to it. Right.
Okay.
So we decided that we would keep the whole idea of point system. We didn't use any of their metrics, so we didn't use the cash and non-cash contributions. We based it completely on tasks and how relevant the tasks are to the company. Now, this is really subjective. This is taking it in a whole different extreme where it's subjective. But the idea is every month you finish a number of tasks that have an impact on the company.
Okay.
Right? And the founders have to decide what the value of that task is, which for a good founding team shouldn't be that hard. They should be able to negotiate and figure out this is how much points you should be getting.
Yeah.
Right? And yes, it does introduce this variable of a founder who did the task. The founder who did the task might feel like, hey, I'm getting shortchanged. But as long as it's a consensual agreement, then you kind of you have that agreement of the founder who did it too, even though they might be feeling a little bit shitty about it.
They do agree with it.
They agree that, yes, we talked about it, and based on the overall scope of things, this is how much slices I should be getting for this. So it's not based on market rate value. It's not based on any other outside variables. It's completely based on what the founders think. Yeah, what the founders think the value of this task is in the company.
Okay. But the problem with that would then be, say, like the more founders you have, the harder that's going to be. And then you have founders where it's like, I don't understand the need for that. And if you can't adequately explain it to them, they're not going to see the value of that. And they can drag down the actual concrete value of that.
The solution I have for that, and the solution we came up with, is the idea is if you have a founder that doesn't really understand the value of the task, you explain to them on their end how that impacts the company. And it universally, everybody understands that this equals this equals this. You understand the impacts of certain decisions and tasks you make in the overall company. If I decide to buy more servers and configure them in this way and optimize them, so I spend 5 days optimizing the heck out of these servers for these requests, I can go up to a business person and say, I did this because it's going to allow us to handle 5,000 more requests. 5,000 more requests means 5,000 more people can be using our service at the same time. And look at the last month. And look at the last month, 10,000 people. Okay. We got 10,000 more users because of this. So you see the value of it from the business side. And if a task doesn't give you value from the business side, especially early on in a startup, why are you doing it?
Yeah, no, agree.
Why are you doing it? If I spent 5 hours setting up the coffee machine in the office, sure, it's overall moral happiness, but I should not be getting that many points for that. Yes, it brings more happiness to the company, but it's not a concrete task that brings about concrete results like customer acquisition or sales, right? And so the idea is you get the whole team to think about all the different tasks. How if they were useless, why should you be getting points for them? If you can't explain to the business person and convince them that this task was useful for the company, I personally think that you should not be getting that many points for it.
But at the same time, the business person explaining what they're doing also has to go.
But yes, if the business person says, I spent a week trying to convince this account or this business to come onto our platform, I'm not going to be like, oh, that was wasted time because they didn't come on. I understand that that's part of doing business, right? They can't use the stuff I'm building unless they go out there and try to grab customers.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a two-way relationship where you're both talking. and that facilitates communication and also builds more understanding of what the other teams
Of
are
the
working
overall
on.
product. I do think that this can definitely help both parties understand everything, because
It's
you
flawed.
kinda have to,
I'm not
yeah.
saying it's not
Yeah.
flawed. The idea is you're building consensus, so you're basically bringing the team closer together, and you're basically building a understanding of what each task that's being done is worth based on the overall team's consensus. And if the team can't come to a consensus, the solution we came up with is we average out the points that everybody kind of gave. So if I gave myself 1,000 points and the other dev guy gave me 1,500 points and the two business guys gave me like 200 and 300, the average is going to be it's going to bring it down lower,
Yeah.
but it's still, because of the dynamics of the team, you still have you'll still get some leeway.
Yeah.
Or you'll be able to like
another. Sorry, you
Go ahead.
able to like. Okay, yeah. You do have another problem that's going to arise where it stresses the importance of weeding out malicious founders. Meaning, you have a founder that is super interested in equity and wants more equity, and he's bringing down the point values that all of his counterparts are getting, so that he can get more equity. Get rid of the co-founder. You have to weed out malicious co-founders or non-contributors to lean down your startup for this to work successfully or optimally.
Exactly. I mean, you have to have a great team. You have to have a team that communicates with each other, that works with each other very well, or else this doesn't work. That trusts each other. Right?
Yeah. Though I would argue, if that's not the case, the business is going to fail anyway, so it won't matter.
Yeah.
Because
So the idea
That's
is
just a requirement.
so another con is you spend a ridiculous amount of time every month trying to figure out what every
Yeah.
person's worth for the company is,
or logging your hours.
which could be a bad thing. I agree with that, where you could waste so much time, nitpicking over, this is how much I'm worth, and I think we've just started the system, so we still don't have a perfect idea of all the problems that come with it. But if we did start running into problems where you're spending 2 or 3 meetings trying to decide everybody's equity, at that point, I think we just throw it out of the window, or figure out that if you can't decide within one meeting, then we default to averages, or we figure out a different way of doing it. And that's where the other equity system, where the slicing the pie framework excels, because you have market value right there. That's something that's an actual real life metric that you can use to determine this. And so you're obviously not talking back and forth about, this is how much I should be getting, this is how much you should be getting.
Though that also presents the con of non-relevant work being done could be weighted too high, which is the point you were making earlier. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go about this. This is just one methodology, and there's a lot of ways to implement this methodology. I don't think it's perfect. I've never personally used it. I know you've used it before, but I've only also ever been in groups of 1 or 2, maybe 3 once, and it was all fairly established beforehand what the roles were going to be.
Yeah.
I think this can excel when you're unsure, or you're at the stage of the business, or you don't have a concrete idea of where the business is going to be, so you don't know how to split it up, and you want to figure out as you go. I think this is a great tool to use.
Exactly. It's something to think about and take elements from it and use it in your own company. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. We will have more episodes about equity splits, how to do an equity splits, general equity topics. But yeah, leave comments, subscribe, tell us if this was good or if this was really bad.
Yeah, maybe
It's
this
your
was
call.
terrible. But it was because Mac ran this one, so obviously it's not.
All right, take care.
I
think that was good. Yeah, that was
It was long, but like I don't
I don't have a
I think
full
20 minutes is fine.